John Law. His name is synonymous with financial collapse, a colossal swindle, and history's first speculative bubble. But who was he, truly? The Scottish son of a banker, he was a gambler, a duelist, even a killer, forced to flee England. In Europe, he wasn't merely in hiding, he was nurturing a radical idea: paper money, not backed by gold, but by a nation's future. He proposed this concept to various monarchs until, finally, bankrupt France offered him a chance. Law became the Comptroller General of Finances, the architect of the Mississippi Company, whose shares skyrocketed, promising untold riches. And what always happens with unchecked greed occurred, a resounding crash that ruined thousands. The myth portrays Law as a mere swindler, but that's only half the truth. He was a genius whose ideas were far ahead of his time, and an opportunist whose overconfidence led to catastrophe. John Law. The son of a banker, he seemed destined for the world of finance. Yet his veins pulsed not with the blood of a shrewd businessman, but with that of a compulsive gambler for whom life itself was the ultimate stake. This wasn't merely a metaphor. Even in his youth, he plunged headfirst into card games, not for primitive gain, but to grasp the invisible laws of chance, the subtle psychology of opponents, and, crucially, to feel control over chaos. The tables of baccarat and faro became his first laboratory, where he honed his unique ability to discern patterns where others saw only randomness. It was here, amidst the tobacco smoke and clinking coins, that his unwavering conviction formed. The world is governed not by gold or brute force, but by information and the mastery of probability, the skillful juggling of the future. For him, every hand of cards was a microcosm of the economy, and winning was proof of his superiority over the unpredictability of fate. This self-assurance, combined with a volatile temper, led to disaster. In 1704, during a duel in London, Law killed a man. It was manslaughter, but the sentence was severe: death. Fleeing England was more than just an escape, it was the ultimate point of no return. He severed ties with his old life forever, with respectability, with conventional norms. As an exile, an outlaw, John Law found not punishment, but a peculiar liberation: freedom from constraints, freedom to think grandly, beyond the conservative confines of contemporary Europe. It was in this status of eternal outsider and observer that he was able to rethink the fundamental principles of the world order. His travels through financial capitals, Venice, Amsterdam, Genoa, became a true university. He didn't just observe, he analyzed every system, every error, every missed opportunity. He saw how the old, precious metal-based monetary system hindered development, shackling the potential of nations. In his mind, an economic theory was emerging, but it was also a bold manifesto. Money is not an end in itself, but a tool that should serve development, not impede it. He saw paper money not merely as a convenience, but as a lever to unleash colossal, hitherto dormant energy capable of transforming entire states. This idea, which seemed insane to most, was for Law a logical continuation of his life philosophy: risk, innovation, and a belief in the possibility of restructuring the system to work more efficiently, even if it meant demolishing old dogmas. He was convinced that his genius could not only manage probabilities in a game, but also rewrite the very rules of economics, creating an ideal system where his foresight would be the cornerstone of prosperity. This was not just ambition, but a deep, almost mystical faith in his own ability to control the future. However, to understand how John Law's audacious ideas could transcend his personal notes and shake an entire continent, one must look at France in the early 18th century. It was not merely a kingdom, but a colossal, exhausted organism on the brink of complete collapse. The Sun King, Louis XIV, had left behind not a golden age, but an empty treasury and an unbearable burden of debt. Wars, exorbitant expenditures on Versailles and the court, and an inefficient, corrupt tax system had drained the country dry. When Louis XIV died in 1715, Philippe d'Orléans became regent for the young Louis XV. He inherited a state whose debt amounted to billions of livres, an astronomical sum effectively equal to the annual national income. The treasury was empty. Coins minted from precious metals were scarce, stifling trade and paralyzing the economy. People hoarded gold and silver, fearing further confiscations or devaluation, which only exacerbated the liquidity crisis. There was no money for anything, not for soldiers' pay, not for road maintenance, not even for the basic functioning of the state apparatus. The populace, exhausted by decades of wars and poverty, was in despair. Peasants barely made ends meet, cities suffered from unemployment, and the aristocracy, accustomed to luxury, watched their privileges erode under the weight of financial reality. France was like dry tinder, ready to ignite from any spark. In this atmosphere of hopelessness and acute need for radical change, even the most outlandish proposals began to seem salvific. Old methods didn't work. Traditional economic approaches had led the country to a dead end. There was a desperate need for a new, revolutionary solution that could instantly turn the situation around, breathe life into a dying economy, and restore hope. It was this desperate need for a miracle, combined with a complete lack of viable alternatives, that created the perfect ground for John Law's ideas, which had seemed heresy until recently, to not only be heard, but also embraced at the highest level. It was then, in 1716, that John Law, an outsider with radical ideas, got his chance. He appeared before Regent Philippe d'Orléans, not as a petitioner, but as a visionary offering the key to France's financial salvation. Law didn't merely ask for money or a position. He proposed a complete overhaul of the system, replacing scarce metal coins with paper money, backed not by gold, but by the nation's potential and lands. He spoke of unprecedented economic growth, a revival of trade, and the repayment of colossal debts. Although many court financiers regarded him with suspicion, seeing only another adventurer, the desperate state of the country compelled the regent to listen. Philippe d'Orléans, himself inclined to experiments and tired of endless dead-end advice, gave Law carte blanche, but with one caveat: he had to start cautiously. Thus, in May 1716, Law founded not a state bank, but a private general bank, the Banque Générale. This was his initial, carefully planned step, designed to prove the viability of his concept. The bank issued banknotes which, unlike previous royal promises, were convertible into coins at a fixed rate. This was fundamentally important. Law knew that trust was the primary capital. He accepted bills of exchange and issued loans, stimulating trade and production. Soon, Law's stable and convenient banknotes were in incredible demand. They were more reliable than the depreciating royal coins, they facilitated transactions, and they returned much-needed liquidity to the economy. The treasury, replenished by taxes collected in the new banknotes, began to revive. The French economy, which had seemed dead, showed the first signs of recovery. The success of the General Bank was astounding and paved the way for the next, far more ambitious undertaking. Law understood that for the nation's full recovery, more than just a bank was needed. A powerful engine of economic growth was required, one capable of generating immense wealth while simultaneously absorbing the national debt. In August 1717, he established the Company of the West, later known as the Mississippi Company. Its purpose was to develop and exploit the vast, largely unexplored territories of French Louisiana in North America. Law skillfully sold the idea of untold riches hidden within this pristine continent: gold, silver, furs, tobacco, sugar, all of which were supposed to flow into France, transforming it into the most prosperous power in the world. Shares in the company were offered in exchange for government bonds, which allowed the government to settle old debts without touching the scarce metallic currency. This was, at first glance, a brilliant scheme that simultaneously addressed the debt problem and promised fantastic prospects, laying the foundation for the grandest financial experiment in history. The launched Mississippi Company didn't just offer shares, it sold a dream, and John Law was its chief evangelist. He possessed not only a sharp mind, but also a magnetic charisma, capable of igniting in people the most primitive yet powerful passion: the desire for instant wealth. Law didn't just explain economic benefits, he painted vivid, almost tangible pictures of the immense riches awaiting discoverers in the wilds of Louisiana. Gold mines, silver lodes, endless plantations of tobacco and sugar cane. These images, skillfully woven into his speeches, acted on the crowd's imagination more powerfully than any numbers. He perfectly understood that in a ruined country where everyone yearned for salvation, the promise of easy money would be the most potent catalyst. He didn't wait for demand to arise on its own, he actively generated it. The initial share issues were deliberately limited, creating artificial scarcity. This immediately sparked a frenzy. People formed multi-hour queues at the company's offices on Rue Quincampoix in Paris, eager to grab their slice of the pie. Speculators resold places in lines and then the shares themselves, even before they officially went on sale. Rue Quincampoix transformed into a bubbling cauldron where rumors and hopes circulated faster than any news. Here, in this financial maelstrom, a new type of millionaire was born, the Mississippi Prince, who rose from humble beginnings through sheer luck and boundless faith in the company of the West. Law skillfully leveraged state support, not just accepting, but actively promoting the idea of exchanging government bonds for company shares. This gave his enterprise not only capital, but also the stamp of official approval, making even the most skeptical courtiers believe in his vision. He surrounded himself with individuals who, though not always possessing true knowledge of the overseas territories, were ready to embrace and spread his enthusiasm. Their testimonies, however indirect, only added fuel to the fire of public euphoria. His adventurous spirit, honed in the gambling houses of Europe, allowed him to adapt instantly to changing situations. When demand for shares peaked, Law announced new issues, absorbing more and more government debt. He constantly expanded the company's powers, merging it with other trading monopolies, and then, in 1719, transforming the General Bank into the state-owned Royal Bank, which now directly managed all of France's currency. This was a bold chess move. He now controlled not only the issuance of shares, but also the very currency with which those shares were bought. Law wasn't just playing by market rules, he was rewriting them on the fly, demonstrating unprecedented flexibility and a drive for absolute control. He was the conductor of this mad orchestra, where every note, be it a rumor, a transaction, or a new decree, served one purpose: to maintain and amplify the illusion of endless growth. The intoxicating scent of profit intoxicated Paris. Rue Quincampoix, once a quiet city artery, transformed into a bustling hive where fortunes were made and lost daily. Here, before everyone's eyes, yesterday's servants, valets, and small shopkeepers suddenly became owners of unprecedented wealth. They were dubbed Mississippi Princes, and their success was living proof that Law's system worked, that the dream of easy money was not just empty words, but a tangible reality. The nobility, suffocating under the weight of debt, eagerly exchanged their old depreciated bonds for new, appreciating shares. Even the Queen Mother, Marie Adélaïde of Savoy, and Regent Philippe d'Orléans himself participated, actively investing and profiting from this financial maelstrom. The regent, initially cautious, now fully trusted Law, seeing him not merely as a financier, but as the dynasty's savior, a man capable of single-handedly pulling France out of its debt crisis. He not only granted Law complete freedom of action, but also protected him from growing criticism, becoming his chief patron and, in essence, an accomplice in this audacious experiment. Yet not everyone was ready to embrace this new reality. While some grew rich, others, representatives of the old elite, saw John Law not as a savior, but as a dangerous adventurer dismantling traditional foundations. The primary stronghold of resistance was the Parlement of Paris, a powerful institution composed of conservative jurists and aristocrats. They viewed paper money not only as a threat to their landholdings and old privileges, but also as an encroachment on the very principle of monarchical power, which was based on the immutability of gold and silver. To them, Law was an outsider, a heretic whose ideas undermined not only the economy, but also the moral fabric of society. The Parlement did not remain silent. Its members openly expressed their distrust of Law's system, refused to register some of his decrees, and even attempted to ban the circulation of banknotes. They saw the unchecked growth of Mississippi Company shares as mere speculative fever, unsupported by real assets, and predicted an inevitable collapse. Their fears were not unfounded. They understood that the endless issuance of paper money without corresponding gold backing would lead to inflation and devaluation. These conservatives, often driven not only by concern for the state, but also by their own financial interests, many owned land and did not want their wealth to depreciate relative to the new paper money, became Law's main antagonists. The conflict between Law and the Parlement intensified daily. In 1718, when Law, already Comptroller General of Finances, attempted to consolidate his power over the mint, the Parlement responded with open defiance. The regent was forced to act harshly. He exiled the members of the Parlement to the remote city of Pontoise to break their resistance. This was a punitive measure, demonstrating that Philippe d'Orléans was willing to go to any lengths for his financial genius. However, even the forced consent of the parliamentarians did not signify their defeat. Their doubts, their open criticism, their predictions of impending collapse, none of this disappeared without a trace. It merely went underground, continuing to erode trust in Law's system, like invisible cracks in a foundation. They were the voice of reason, stifled by euphoria, but one that was bound to be heard sooner or later. While euphoria swept through Paris and Mississippi, company shares soared. Some of the most perceptive players began to notice alarming symptoms. The first cracks in the facade of the grand illusion appeared not on the exchanges, but in the behavior of those who stood at the system's inception. Those with insider information who truly understood the scale of Louisiana's unexplored lands and the actual volume of its wealth began quietly, almost imperceptibly, to withdraw their capital from the shares. They exchanged the rapidly rising yet unbacked paper for solid gold and silver, then transferred their fortunes abroad. Their actions were the first drops foreshadowing a financial flood, but in the general clamor of jubilation, hardly anyone noticed them. Law, possessing incredible intuition, could not have missed these signals. But his overconfidence and belief in his own ability to control the market prevented him from stopping in time. Instead of acknowledging the limits of growth and initiating a controlled decline, he made a fatal error in early 1720 in an attempt to halt the outflow of precious metals and compel everyone to use his banknotes. He issued a series of decrees that became the death sentence for his system. First, a ban was imposed on owning large quantities of gold and silver. Anyone found with more than 500 livres in coins risked losing everything. Then, in March of the same year, an even more shocking directive followed. Government employees, officials, merchants, everyone was required to accept only Royal Bank banknotes for payment. Metal currency was, in essence, outlawed. These measures, intended to strengthen the position of paper money, had the opposite effect. The population, terrified by the prospect of losing their hard currency savings, rushed to exchange them for banknotes, and then to buy real assets with those banknotes: land, jewelry, real estate. But Law dealt the main blow to trust. the very capital he had so carefully built at the beginning. When the government, in essence, took away people's right to own gold, it was perceived as an open assault on their property and freedom. Panic, which had been smoldering beneath the surface, erupted. Rue Quincampoix, once a symbol of unprecedented enrichment, transformed into an arena of despair. Crowds of people, yesterday's Mississippi princes, now besieged the company's offices, trying to sell their shares while they were still worth something. But there were almost no buyers. The share price, which had recently been thousands of percent above its nominal value, began a precipitous fall. Each new decree from law, intended to stabilize the situation, only added fuel to the fire of panic. In May 1720, in a desperate attempt to save the system, law announced a 50% devaluation of the Royal Bank banknotes. This was an admission of complete collapse. Money that had been guaranteed by the state just yesterday instantly lost half its value. This decision marked the culmination of the disaster. Trust, the fragile foundation of any financial system, was irrevocably shattered. People whose savings were instantly devalued were furious. Rue Quincampoix became the site of mass riots. Those who, just months prior, had reveled in luxury now found themselves ruined. Law, whose name was once spoken with reverence, became the object of universal hatred. His portraits were burned in the streets. The crowd demanded his head. The illusion of wealth, built on the shifting sands of speculation, collapsed, burying not only the fortunes of thousands of French citizens, but also the reputation of a man who believed he could outwit the very laws of economics. When the dust settled on the ruins of the Mississippi Company, it became evident the promised untold riches of Louisiana were merely a mirage. The reality was harsh. The vast American territories of the French crown remained largely undeveloped. Their depths contained no mythical gold and silver mines, and the promised flows of furs and tobacco were incommensurate with the scale of financial expectations. In essence, the company's shares, which had soared to unprecedented heights, were backed by nothing but collective belief and speculative fervor. Thousands of those very Mississippi princes, yesterday's lucky ones, were instantly reduced to beggary. Their paper fortunes evaporated, leaving behind only mountains of worthless shares and banknotes. Many who had managed to exchange their papers for land or jewels retained some of their assets, but the majority were ruined. The street riots in Paris were a direct consequence of this mass impoverishment, and the crowd's fury turned on the man who had so recently been their idol. John Law, once the all-powerful Comptroller General of Finances, was forced to flee Paris in December 1720, escaping a potential lynching. Disguised and in hiding, he left France, leaving behind a country plunged into chaos. The Crown, faced with complete economic paralysis, widespread bankruptcies, and popular unrest, was compelled to take emergency measures. The Royal Bank, Law's creation, was closed, and its banknotes were ultimately rendered worthless. France reverted to metallic currency circulation, which, on the one hand, restored confidence in the currency, but on the other, once again plunged the economy into a liquidity deficit. The national debt, which Law had promised to fully repay, was restructured through a series of forced conversions and reductions. This meant that holders of old bonds and Mississippi Company shares received only a small fraction of their original investments, effectively a partial write-off of government obligations at the public's expense. The Parlement of Paris, once exiled for its criticism, returned and reasserted its authority, becoming the primary voice of conservative financial principles. Their predictions regarding the collapse of paper money came true, reinforcing the conviction that any currency required strict metallic backing. Trust in any form of paper money was undermined for decades, and France, unlike England, where the banking system developed more stably, was unable to effectively utilize financial innovations to stimulate its economy. This monumental failure ingrained in the nation's consciousness the belief that true wealth could only be found in gold and silver, trapping the country in an archaic monetary system until the French Revolution. Upon leaving France, John Law left behind not only financial ruins, but also a myth that long persisted in the minds of subsequent generations. His name became a symbol of an unprecedented swindle, and he himself the embodiment of a crook whose mere greed led to ruin. But this simplified version, convenient for both the victors and the ruined, concealed a far more complex truth. Law was not merely a charlatan, he was a genius who foresaw the future of finance, understanding the true power of credit and paper money long before most. His experiment, however catastrophic it proved to be, demonstrated unprecedented potential for economic growth, yet simultaneously exposed the greatest vulnerability of any system built on trust, human avarice, and panic. The paradox of his legacy is that, despite being cast down as a swindler, he laid the groundwork for modern banking and the concept of liquidity. His story is not just a chronicle of deception, but an enduring reminder of the fragility of financial trust and the dangers that arise when innovation collides with unchecked speculation. And in this lies his true, lasting lesson for all eras.